After reading the Existence in Black articles, viewing the film The Thin Red Line, and observing discussion in class, it has come to be apparent that as much as we push death to the side, it is always part of our decisions. Our lives are marked by our death, and as Naomi Zach discusses, we cannot fully achieve this freedom from death until the realization of death's inevitability is reached. In this newfound freedom, it can be said that one is living with more choice. But how can an individual fully accept death? Is there not a complete disconnect from living when one fully understands and does not fear death? Why is it that we should not fear death, then? Are we supposed to not then feel sad when a friend or a parent passes away if this certain individual felt as though they had achieved this realization of death's inevitability? As Zach points out, death has to be seen and appreciated for what it is before we can fully appreciate life. This does not mean that one cannot be sad when another dies, because to appreciate what it means to live is to understand that life is both sad and happy. As outlined by Robert Burt in Existence, Identity, and Liberation, one's identity and the formation of that identity directly correlates with one's liberation. Burt disclaims that human existence and identity are not simply given. In reality, and according to Sartre, human beings are not identifiable, and the struggle for identity can actually be defined as the joy for one's liberation. Under an existential critique, one's existence is one that is not predetermined or fixed. We are free of destiny and free to make individual choices. This freedom of existence also relates to our freedom to construct our own identities and the joy that should arise from that liberation. When individuals lose the ability to feel liberated within the construction of their own identities is when oppression has impacted social existence. According to Burt, oppression robs people of their identity. Oppression imposes a type of identity on the marginalized group of people that then alienates them from the rest of society. Oppression also becomes internalized, which forever prohibits the oppressed individual to construct his or her desirable identity. In terms of a black urban reality, Burt makes an interesting point that humanity itself is defined as white, and that to be black is perceived to go against humanity. Blackness is perceived to represent inferiority and the negation of humanity. This is why the internalization of these perceived notions of blackness within the black individual creates a loss of identity and a series of self-depreciation. The most important aspect of identity within our society is the realization that identity cannot be formed without racially transforming the social order of our society. But to radically transform our social order and to rid our society of oppression, there has to be a focus on self-creation and transforming our individual identities. As Burt points out, both transformations have to happen simultaneously in order for either to work. Under existential terms, race can also be redefined and constructed. The notion of race is not biological, but instead is an idea that is socially constructed within our society. As Naomi Zach and Robert Burt illustrate, developing a racial consciousness, specifically a black consciousness, is to regain existential integrity. As Zach points out, it is important to understand that identifying oneself under one's own terms and regaining existential integrity is not the same as how one is identified. It seems that race has to be acknowledged and appreciated for how it is perceived. Since it is already an aspect of our social lives, and since we are always going to be the objects of identification, race has to be understood as a form of identification, but not necessarily as a way to self-identify. According to Zach, race to the existentialist cannot be used to build self-identity because it promotes oppression, which then limits agency. If one, especially a person of color, chooses existentialism and the freedom to identify, then race cannot be used and accepted as a foundation.